Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. So, so some of you might recognize this topic since we discussed a bit of this in our lab sessions as well. And those who have been here for that might recognize this specific topic. But today we are just going to go in a deep dive onto that topic and see what are the theories and what are different aspects related to it that we need to consider when we are doing API management in a business, basically. So without further ado, let me get to it. Switching. Okay. Right. So the main question we are trying to answer here first is, what is Egress API management? So I'm sure for those who attended the lab session, you might have an answer already, but just hear me out. So there's an aspect to it that we didn't consider there as well. Let me go through it step by step. So here you might see we have taken a restaurant as an example. So you might wonder, okay, what a restaurant has to do with API management? So let me get to it. So let's take two different scenarios. There's a diner today who is trying to go and have a meal at a given restaurant. So let's look at this whole situation in two different perspectives. A diner who is going to a establishment basically have one accomplishment in his mind. He just have to have something to eat that day. And if you take a cook in the kitchen, his objective is to actually serve all the diners who come in that day and make sure that they are happy with what they have on that specific day and will return for another meal another day. So let's take in a business perspective how these two scenarios operate. So if you take a customer who comes into a restaurant, he sits down in a desk, and now there's a waiter who comes to their desk to actually discuss with them and to take orders as to what they actually need and what they need to have that day. So the cook normally don't come to the desk and actually discuss with the clients himself to get these requirements. So here we take this persona called a waiter, who actually takes these orders and communicate to the cook according to what is available that day, and the waiter will be doing the controlling as to what meal items are there on offer that day, what are the specials for that day, and what is available, so that the communication between the cook and the client is much more efficient and it's regulated. And if you take the cook's perspective, the food items are not popping up in the kitchen automatically, right? So there's a restaurant manager who have the responsibility to talk with suppliers, source these food items, and make sure that the food items they get to the kitchen are in proper quality and it's well, maybe it's free range chickens or properly sourced vegetables. So these stuff should be governed by a restaurant manager who ensures quality and ensures that all the food items are cost efficient as well, and so that the business is running properly. So if you take these two different perspectives, since the restaurant manager is taking care of that side of the area, the cook can actually focus on preparing the food item on his own and ensure that, okay, I don't need to focus on all this stuff. I can actually get these items together and focus on cooking my meal. And the waiter takes care of her responsibilities and actually give the trust to the cook so that he can actually take the order as gospel and now get it done. So if you take these two different perspectives, this is sort of like Ingress API management. So if we look at it, so if we take an organization, somebody coming into the organization boundary, we can actually have proper access control, proper authentication, and proper governance so that the people coming in, we can actually trust them and actually serve. And if you take the next part of the equation, it's Egress API management, because now we are going out of the organization boundary, sourcing whatever we need, whatever external services we need to consume, and actually make those things happen. So as we discussed, so Ingress API management is what we have already heard about, what we have been excelling for some time, and what we are really good at doing. And this will standardize the API exposure to outside your organization boundary and ensure that the calls coming within your organization are actually secure and trusted so that you can now serve them properly. So this is what our API management gateway have been doing really good all this time, and most of you all have been trusting us to ensure this area of your business is taken care of. So today, mainly we are going to focus about this Egress API management aspect. So here I'm going to put out a definition. So Egress API management refers to the policies, controls, monitoring mechanisms to ensure that the outbound API requests from an organization systems to services are properly controlled and governed. So let me get into this topic. So if you take an organization boundary, you will have your backend services running, and the Ingress gateway will take care of the end consumers accessing your backend services and ensure that this part of the equation is done properly. And today we are talking about this part of the equation, where now you have to work with external services and ensure that your business is properly and efficiently doing calls outside of the organization and actually have better observability and control of that part of the equation. Yeah, so let's dig deep into why Egress APIs matter. So all this time, so some of you might think, okay, hearing about this problem, this doesn't seem to be a new problem to solve because we always had to do this. But for most businesses, they were happy with actually having their API invocations and accessing within the organization boundary. But especially with AI and SaaS applications, it was actually needed for an organization to do external calls actually and get information from external parties, and that actually brought in a new set of problems for the business to solve. So let me go through some of the problems faced when we are trying to do these external calls to external systems. So here, so in a analysis done by Sol Security, it's actually they have done a survey, and most of the organizations have faced some sort of a API security risks with leaked credentials and unwanted access and problems which have occurred due to ungoverned outside external calls. So for an example, you might have this experience where within an organization, if you now have a key to access some external service, and now once you share the keys within the organization, you have no visibility as to which team used more of this key and who have shared these keys, whether these keys have got leaked, and all this stuff. You don't have proper access because now you have just a key to access this. So that's one issue. And the next problem is performance. So let's say, let's for an example take a LLM application, and at once we see that OpenAI is actually taking a long time. And at once you are getting about 20 seconds response time for LLM call. And that's one problem as well, because now you have OpenAI key and you have nothing to do about it. And switching the vendors are a huge problem, which are talking about in the vendor locking. So in case you need to do a switch quickly, it's very difficult to actually make that happen. And if you take cost is also a very main point here, because if we have uncontrolled access to external service, now you don't have any control over the cost, because now you have a limited amount of, maybe if you take a LLM service, you have a limited amount of tokens that you have to work with. And if the tokens are utilized without any control, now you will have to again extend your quota more and more within that month. And that can introduce new problems, and always uncontrolled access is never a good thing to have. And last but not the least, the lack of visibility is a main problem, because you might have resonated with the earlier topics I mentioned as well. Not having proper visibility as to who uses these keys and which teams uses these keys, and what applications uses these keys, and what are the token counts, and also we are talking about shadow SaaS APIs. So there can be APIs you think don't use these keys, but they do. And lack of visibility will not help you to find out these APIs down the road. So to solve this problem, basically we have brought in this concept called Egress API Gateways. So through Egress API Gateways, we aim to solve most of these problems. Yeah, so let's go one by one. So here, unified control plane for outbound APIs. So having a single point of reference for all these APIs really helps. So as you can recall in the last lab session, whoever was there here might recall we talked about the unified control plane. So this unified control plane should have access to Ingress APIs, Egress APIs, whatever the gateway type it is. I think Sanjay will today go a bit more in depth into how federated gateways work, but through a unified control plane, we should have access to observability to all APIs that are there within an organization, Ingress or Egress, and what sort of clients actually have access to it, and manage them through keys and proper observability. And dynamic credential management. So once you have an Egress gateway, you don't need to actually share the external keys with the internal app teams, basically. So you can actually configure the API gateway with the actual external keys and actually give the developers keys from the API manager itself. And now you have the control to actually deny, block, or regulate or rate limit these requests within our gateway, which we have always done and we are good at doing. So even in this Egress gateway scenario, we'll be helping you out with those same capabilities that we're really good at. And if you take rate limiting and cost control, as I mentioned before, it will really help with this as well, because now you have the visibility onto what teams use most of these tokens, and now you can actually control the access according to your quotas you have with the external parties. And in case you need more quota, you can actually make better business decisions to actually enforce them. And observability and monitoring. So this I think we already talked about, but now this gives you the ability to track the latency, error rates, and all this stuff. So you can actually work with your external suppliers as well, external services, to actually increase quotas or actually work with them to actually get better performant backend services to work with the applications. And here also, last but not the least, we have this security and compliance, which is one of the very important aspects here, because now data is going out of your organization boundary. And if you are dealing with PII and custom information and sensitive information within your organization, you should always have control to all the calls going out to your organization, because now you can't actually trust the application developers to not have any PII or sensitive information in the request going out. You will have to have a central point of control to ensure that, okay, all the calls going out of my organization are secured and I know what's happening there. So basically, having that sort of trust onto that part of the business operations will help you out in scaling and actually working in a rapid pace, because now you know for sure that, okay, this is what happens in my organization, there's nothing going wrong with it. So let's take a real world use case and talk about, I think we'll be taking 2 examples, and let's talk about how each of these examples will serve the organization to better manage these outbound calls. So, yeah, I think this I mentioned before. So before GenAI, most people didn't have this problem in a huge way, but this problem actually propped up in the industry, and a need for a proper solution was intensified with this GenAI application development. But this can always be applied to other external services as well, which I'll get to in a couple of slides. So let's first take a Egress gateway in an aspect of a AI gateway itself. So here I'm not particularly talking about our Egress gateway itself. I think we talked about that in the lab session, but here I'm trying to talk about in a very industry-specific, use case-specific point of view. So if we take scenario where now an organization within their organization boundary have a AI backend application. So for an example, let's take it as some sort of a customer support chatbot. And now this chatbot can't work on their own, but I get it. In one day in the future, there might be a case where you have your own models running, inference models within your organization. But at least for the moment, you get very performant models out of your business boundary. So when this specific application needs to do an invocation out of your organization, now you have a set of problems to solve. So let me go through one by one how a egress gateway solves this stuff. So first of all, we can actually enforce a proper request limit to say that, okay, if an internal team is trying to use a specific LLM, you can say that for a month, this is the amount of tokens you can utilize. In case you need more tokens, we can work with the external services and actually make it happen. So you know that any unintended abuse of these tokens will never happen, because there will be a set quota, and if you have a budget of $1,000 per month for LLM services, you can ensure that I don't cross that limit whatsoever, even if it is a pay-as-you-go model. And second is cleans and formats input data before sending it to the AI model. So this is where the compliance and security aspect comes. So you can actually have sanitization policies and guardrails kind of things. So I think we'll get to the guardrails later on, especially sanitization. So if there's a request going out of your organization, you can actually clean it and actually ensure that it doesn't have any business critical sensitive information. But most of the AI models these days ensure that they won't use any data for training, but in case you have very strict organization policies, you can actually enforce them using a egress AI gateway. And next is dynamically selects the best model based on the performance, cost, or latency. So this is a very interesting aspect, because with LLM services, you can't always ensure that it will actually work exactly the way you expect. There can be cases where it takes time, where certain requests, let's say, if your token count is very high per request, it can take more time to process. And depending on the model, the time taken can change as well. So dynamic routing is something which people are mostly talking about and sought after in this sort of backdrop, so that let's say you have Anthropic and OpenAI set up as the backends, we can actually see what's the live latency with the backend and actually switch these providers based on the performance, cost to latency at that time. And you can set something up like if the cost exceeds, so let's say for a month you have already utilized 1 million tokens and you are not happy with going more with the same provider, because then it will cost you a huge amount for that month. So then depending on the cost, you can actually switch between providers or models to actually minimize the cost and efficiency within the organization and ensure that you all don't incur huge costs and have better control there. And next is tracks API usage, response times, and error rates. So in order to dynamically choose the best model and make these business decisions, you will need to definitely track this information. And for this, most of these egress API gateways have use case built dashboards in analytics. So you would have seen even in the WSO2 egress gateway demo we did, we had a dashboard which actually gives you insights onto the token count used and what are the models mostly used in the organization. And this information is always helpful to get a self-catered view of what's happening within this sort of scenario. And guardrails is always very important. But if you take guardrails, these days there are two different types of guardrails. We have static verifications and dynamic verifications. So static verifications are basically something like regex validations or schema validations. But mostly what we see in guardrails is where people use models. So there are custom trained models to actually verify whether a given request is properly formatted and whether sensitive data is not there in it. And also it involves response validation, because somebody can trick the LLM to actually send something back which is not intended for the organization. And you can ensure that the response from the LLM is not having anything that the business is not happy with. And guardrails go both request and response side. So the validation in these two areas will ensure that your LLM backend will not get any unintended responses or will not send out any unintended requests to the LLM. So that is a very important part. So this will involve mostly organizations try to train their own models so that within the organization they have their own principles, right? What shouldn't go out and what shouldn't come in. But always in the industry you get custom built models for things like for common identified problems in the space of software, where topics we are not happy with. And finally, prevent excessive API calls to paid services, reducing unnecessary costs. I think we already talked about this. Yeah, let's get to the next slide. So in this case, AI is not the only area where egress gateways can be applied. So in this use case, I'm trying to take something like Twilio, which is a messaging service. So let's say you have a help desk application within your organization, and now you need your organization's backend application to actually call this Twilio service. And here, in this backdrop, let me go through some sort of use cases you can implement through an egress gateway. So firstly, route messages via the cheapest, fastest carrier dynamically. So here, this is similar to the dynamic routing capability I mentioned in the previous slide. So this ensures that your calls go to the proper client and your business application is served with the best possible option in your backend service. And next is prevent spamming users. So this is basically you can have a control so that, let's say, due to unintended scenario, application tries to bug users very quickly and send them about 10 requests per second. So you can actually ensure that, okay, that doesn't happen for me. And my business sending these messages to users are controlled and users are not unhappy with what happens here, even if it is a bug or something. So next is ensure SMS to EU users go through a GDPR compliant pathway. So depending on the global position of the users you are trying to access, you might have to do additional verifications before you send the message out to the users through Twilio. So that is another use case you can achieve. And finally, if one carrier fails, you can actually shut down your business and say that, okay, I'm done with it. You will have to fall back to some other carrier and actually get the use case done. So a gateway like this will help you to have this resilience within the organization and have the proper governance within the organization itself, whatever the capability that the backend external service provides or not. There can be external services that provides these features, but in this case, you will have better control and you will not have vendor lock-in and depend on them too much. So there are other scenarios where these egress gateways can be utilized. I added a slide for that. So if you have Salesforce calls, Google Workspace calls, Stripe calls, data enrichment, financial transactions, for all this stuff, you can actually think about utilizing an egress gateway. Yeah, so going through what I have mentioned today, so just think through these topics and just have a self-reflection within your organization. What sort of API calls goes out of your organization, and how can I actually bring these things to a single place, and how can I control these stuff to actually ensure these principles within your organization itself, and how can you act to actually make these things happen and make your lives easier in the long term. Just to go through some latest trends we have. So egress APIs came to the forefront of the industry about 6 months back. But now there are some new principles coming up. So if you see AI ML driven security, that is one specific area where we do proper anomaly detection and actually detect stuff before it happens, and actually since we have control of all the external services that are going out of the organization, we can check for anomalies, and if there are unwanted usages, unwanted spikes, and unintended use cases for the normal operations, we can quickly identify them and rectify them before it makes any significant impact in your organization. And with new protocols coming up like gRPC use and GraphQL use for external service calls, we'll have to figure out better observability and controls for these specific protocols as well, in addition to REST, and we have seen zero trust security models where even within the organization, when the backend service tries to invoke the Egress API, we have security implemented there so that we have proper security with zero trust. So lastly, we have data residency and compliance. So this is basically what we talked about, where when we try to send something to EU users, we'll have to do some sort of a GDPR compliance check, sort of a validation. So these are some topics that are coming up. So to end it, I'd like to let you know that just take these concepts to mind and actually self-reflect and see how you can actually apply. And it's better late than never. Let's try to act now. And in case you'll need some specific use cases from WSO2, just always approach us, talk to us. We can help you out with actually making these things happen. So yeah, so today I think next Vidura will be doing the session, and later on we'll be having a federated API management session, and then Pubudu will be going through Bijira, and later on we'll have a customer panel later on. So we can end it here. Always we'll be hanging around here. You can come and talk to us.